When those other companies aren't brave or foolhardy enough to go, trust Planet Express for reliable, on-time delivery.
What the hell is going on at Planet Express? Professor Farnsworth has a waterfront property in Manhattan, where he runs a hemorrhaging business, paying at least 7 employees, doing various research, and even maintaining a spaceship. How does he pay for any of that? Sure, maybe after Wild Green Yonder, he's probably just living off of those sweet Leah Wong dollars. But what about the original Fox run of this series? In The Lesser of Two Evils, Professor Farnsworth tells the crew that losing a gigantic atom worth $100,000 would bankrupt the whole company. In Love and Rocket, the professor has Lela at the end of a cattle prod in an attempt to score a contract with Romanticorp because of how poor the company is doing.
With that big new Romanticorp contract, I've been able to make those government-mandated upgrades you've all been suing me about.
In The Root of All Evil, Dwight and Qbert quickly build up a newspaper delivery service that is far more successful than Planet Express.
Yeah, that's great.
All right. Naturally, we're humiliated.
Okay, yeah, I know the business fails, but they were doing way better than their fathers ever did.
No.
The episode Future Stock gives us a direct look at Planet Express's dire financial situation.
The blue pie slice represents the money we earn from shipping packages, while the green slice represents an $8 bank error in our favor.
Gonna start by pointing out that the chart is labeled income, and Hermes uses the word earned when talking about this chart. This isn't a profit overview, this is revenue. This is all of the money that's coming into the company. So if this slice is $8, and this slice is half the size, then this slice is $4. $4. These examples of ineptitude aren't just throwaway jokes, like how sometimes Elzar's restaurant is like super fancy and other times he's crushing roaches with stale bread.
Bang!
Planet Express is objectively a bad delivery service, if you can even consider them a delivery service, like at all.
Didn't we used to be a delivery company?
They earned $4 delivering packages over the course of the year. They either charge very little for shipping, or they make very few deliveries. Actually, I think at $4, it's kinda necessary for it to be both. Over the course of the 72 episodes of the original Fox run, Planet Express took on 20 actual deliveries. You might be thinking, as I was, that can't be right. They're always flying all over the place. And you're right. But I checked, and the majority of the time, they're not delivering shit. It's only those 20 instances in 19 episodes where a package or delivery is actually being referenced. The professor is always sending the crew on these missions, like saving animals on Vergon 6, which they did fail by the way, but those aren't deliveries, they're fetch quests at best. Sure, a mail carrier is going to come to your house to pick up a package, but if you're shipping fresh honey, it's not like they're going to collect the honey for you. There are some other times throughout the series where the crew is seen leaving a planet for an undisclosed reason, and sure, it's possible that those were for deliveries as well, but given how often we see the crew not delivering packages, we really can't give them the benefit of the doubt here. We really can't give them the benefit of the doubt anywhere because the track record on those deliveries, well, it's not good. I'm going to be dividing each delivery into 2 broad categories. Complications outside of the crew's control, and complications resulting directly from the crew's actions or inactions. This distinction will be made whether the package actually arrives or not, so I'm also going to highlight successful deliveries in green and unsuccessful deliveries in red. This might seem like a weird way to slice things up, but they're weirdly bad at delivering things, which makes it hard to cleanly sort. Speaking of which, first unclean sort. Deliveries that went off without any complications will be sorted in the first category. Don't worry, very few of them, which is why it's a good place to start. The crew's most successful delivery was made without Fry, who was looking up curse words in the dictionary. Bender and Lela both received medals, and as I go through the rest of the deliveries the crew makes, you'll understand why this has to be the most successful. The closest second also didn't include Fry. When the standard crew is summarily fired after Fry and Bender go on a joyride in the ship, Amy, Zoidberg, and Hermes act as an interim crew. We see them returning from Fantasy World without a scratch on them or the ship. Technically, the crew is 100% successful in delivering Gunther to Mars, but that doesn't count. Professor Farnsworth was on the ship at the time they were delivering Gunther to him on Mars. They gave him a ride. That doesn't count. They're not going to get paid for that. And this is about determining Planet Express's competence as a delivery company, as well as getting a sense of its finances. $4. It feels kind of important to mention these kinds of things. Kind of similarly, there's the whole issue with Tweenus 12. The whole planet was destroyed by giant brains before the crew even knew they were delivering a package there. But it goes in category 1, I guess, because
they paid in advance.
The delivery to Cannibalon is another one that happens off screen. We only see the crew return. The ship is fine, but the crew is pretty roughed up. Given the name of the planet, though, likely not their fault. We're gonna put this one in category 1. Less clear is Fry's first delivery, a claw machine to the moon. It seems to go off without a hitch, except Amy drops the keys to the ship into the package and has to fish them out later before they can return home. We're going to be generous, though, and we're going to put this in category 1, because there aren't a lot in category 1, and because ultimately the delivery was made without any sort of long-term damage. Like I said, these are a bit messy, like the episode Brannigan Begin Again, the only episode in the original run at least, with 2 delivery attempts. Lela is moments away from delivering the ceremonial scissors for the opening of a new dupe headquarters when Zap Brannigan arrests her. The whole ordeal ends horribly. And the scissors never really make it to their destination, though Zap was supposed to be the ribbon cutter and did technically get the scissors. But it is also 100% Zap's fault, and he's not a member of the Planet Express crew, so category 1. Though, later in the episode, the crew does attempt another delivery, and this one also fails. This time, Zap contributes directly to the failure, and then leads a mutiny. But this time, because now he is a member of the Planet Express crew, it's going to be our first in category 2. Now, if you're keeping score or looking at the graphic that is on the screen, you may have noticed that I've only listed off 7 deliveries in category 1 before moving on to category 2. And if you're wondering if all 12 of the remaining deliveries are also going to land in category 2, what am I, just going to fucking jump around? Duh, yeah, no, of course they are. So I'm going to do it again. This fucking chart is not complicated enough, so I'm going to group the deliveries in the second category by who on the crew's fault it is. So the first culprit should come as absolutely no surprise. Bender is responsible for the majority of the complications that arise during deliveries. His most minor offense would be almost forgetting to deliver the lug nuts to the bot planet. He ultimately does deliver them, but it took such a roundabout way, he did a significant amount of damage to the robots on that planet. Being enslaved by pharaohs during a delivery certainly wasn't the crew's fault, until Bender becomes pharaoh and then they don't leave.
Remember me!
The only problem with delivering subpoenas to Sicily 8 was Fry getting the kiss of death, until Bender takes them off course to get a huge hit of electricity. The delivery of the Quantum Tiara was not just late, it's late because Bender was trying to steal it and frame Flexo. He successfully did the latter. On actual deliveries, the ship has only crashed 2 times, and both times, guess who was responsible? No, it's Bender. Look, sleep bending or not, he bends the ship's L-beam. Without it, space travel is but the fevered dream of a madman. He's also personally responsible for the huge tanker spill on Pluto because he was flying the ship drunk. Or, not drunk enough. Robots.
I forget how it works with you. Anyway, you haven't drunk exactly the right amount.
And finally, there's the time the Robot Mafia, with their fresh recruit Blotto, stole the Zubin cigars the crew is transporting. Sure, it wasn't his idea, and ultimately he saved Fry and Leela's lives, but he also kept his cut. Fortunately, that wraps up the Bender category, but seeing as it's the same size as category 1, I'd say that Bender is categorically a liability. And he's not the only one. In My 3 Sons, Fry does successfully deliver the package, but then he immediately drinks its recipient. Amy even gets in on the action when she stows away in the package itself and hijacks the ship to visit Kif. But surprisingly, the second biggest liability to deliveries isn't Fry or Amy, or even the professor, it's Lela. We only have one instance of the crew deciding together to sabotage a delivery when they decide to try to ambush Robot Santa. Lela is the captain of this crew though, and you have to lay that blame directly at her feet. Especially because the other 2 times she's been directly responsible for a failed delivery, it's been because she's ditched the package out into the vacuum of space. It's worth noting, though not technically relevant to this video, that at least one of those times, a lot of people died. Planets worth. What I'm saying is, and what this straightforward chart shows, is the crew is a liability to the company they work for, the customers they're delivering to, and in a surprising amount of cases, innocent bystanders as well. There has to be a reason they haven't been fired yet. And considering this business makes $4 annually shipping packages, it seems like a stretch to call them a delivery company at all. Which is bizarre considering how much overhead this not delivery company has. I've mentioned the property is in Manhattan. Now the professor is either paying a mortgage or rent on that, or at the very least, property tax. He employs 7 people, 5 of which he presumably pays. He's obviously not paying Zoidberg, and maybe Amy is an unpaid intern during this period. But with ship repairs, hell, building repairs, all of his zany inventions, the money has to be coming from somewhere. Because I just wrote 4 pages proving something that the show readily admits. It's not coming from package delivery. So what's going on? Is it some sort of post-scarcity automated future that allows for a universal basic needs program? Or is the professor bankrolling his entire failed operation off of some old payout from MomCorp? Or is it possible that Professor Farnsworth
is our big murderer?
1,000 years is a long time, and a lot can change.
Admiral Crunch?
From very crucially important things like cereal brands, I'm not joking, to the trivial changes like the way the world government works and career chips, I'm still not joking. The 31st century is quite a different place. Look, technically I'm about to talk about politics for a second, but not from a point of any sort of ideological merit, just from a here's a possible version of Futurama's politics, which are similar to ours, but clearly not identical. Don't worry about the fact that I think we should put every billionaire in a big hole near a bunch of cement trucks and just, I don't know, see what happens. My personal politics aside, what does society in the future look like, according to Futurama? As I mentioned earlier, the entire Earth is unified under one democratic government. The democratic system is clearly based heavily on the United States, and if you ask me, it kind of looks like the United States just took over the world at some point, but I already said I was gonna keep my personal politics to myself, so that's all I'll say about that. Sure sounds like a song.
Kill him! Kill the traitor!
Okay, so the Earth government is inspired by the US government, but does it operate like it? Absolutely not. Evidence cited. Career chips. Earth has some sort of admittedly dystopian universal jobs program. Everyone is assigned a function based on what they're best at, and
What if I refuse?
Then you'll be fired.
Fine.
Out of a cannon into the sun.
career chips in Futurama are wildly inconsistent, and I don't mean as a series. I mean they can't even keep it straight in a single episode. Law and Oracle? Definitely a low-tier episode, but one of the few that has a career chip reference.
DNA and career chip, please.
But in the beginning of the same episode, Fry quit his job as a delivery boy and got a job as a cop, with no mention of a career chip. Which means in this scene where Fry is a cop demanding to see this man's career chip, his own career chip actually says delivery boy. On second thought, a cop enforcing laws that they aren't following themselves is actually totally believable. And I'm breaking my rule again. The actual point here is what we know about career chips is limited. It's hard to say whether or not career chips are tied directly to employers or just allow a person to get certain types of jobs. Farnsworth keeps the career chips he needs to staff his company, but it is unclear if he is supposed to be doing this. Schrodinger's career chip was issued by the New York DMV, similar to how Fry was going to be issued a chip from the cryogenics lab. Further, Fry uses Lela's old cryotech career chip to get hired at the cryogenics lab. They didn't provide one upon hiring. The fact that the professor collects and holds onto career chips that work for his companies is kind of suspicious. Anyway, career chips come with some potential baggage. Simply put, different careers are going to allow for different salary ranges and create an immovable class system based on these career chips, which we can only assume are based on DNA.
DNA and career chip.
And I'm pretty sure that's eugenics. And this time, I'm not going to apologize for my personal politics when I say I'm against eugenics. Fortunately, I guess, it does look like the system is loosely enforced. Lela quits to become a retail agent in Overclockwise, and as I mentioned earlier, Fry does something similar, which honestly does just make the concept even more messed up, because that means it's being selectively enforced. And what happens if the company you work for goes bankrupt, or if the career chip you have is for a dead industry? You're looking at a very bleak dystopia here for the lower classes, which doesn't make a ton of sense considering a certain type of phone booth sprinkled throughout New York. Look, I'm going to be referring to these as phone booths, but we all know the particular type of booth that I'm talking about when I say that. So, light content warning for this particular type of booth. Jump to the timecode on the screen and the link in the corner to skip this part. What I'm saying is, if career chips actually created this impregnable class system based on careers assigned by the state, it might be tough to maintain a working lower class when also offering a convenient and cheap exit from the otherwise inescapable hell. We do see people use these phone booths occasionally, but not as often as you'd expect given the grim potential of this dystopia. So what if it's not a dystopia? This is a society with automation and AI so complex that it has a delta brainwave. There's a realistic chance that technological advances have made it easy to meet everyone's basic needs. I'm extrapolating here, but there are some stronger pointers to this concept than to the former.
We recycle everything. Robots are made from old beer cans. Nothing just gets thrown away.
I'm not saying that eliminating literally all waste through sustainable recycling is utopic, but I certainly should be saying that. If we try to look at career chips in this light, and I'm taking some big liberties here, but we could imagine a world where the same program that assigns career chips is also meeting the basic needs of those individuals. Food, shelter, enough money for the basics. There are clearly additional ways to earn money beyond your standard function, but you receive your basic needs because you're performing that function. Once again, we are not talking about my personal politics here. I only said that sustainable, waste-free recycling was utopic. And I really want to emphasize that when I say that the phone booths also would work in this society as an extreme form of bodily autonomy. Once again, not making any commentary on the subject here, just trying to explain their existence in the show. Okay, we're done talking about the fucking booths though, I promise. Ultimately, it's too hard to tell the exact layout of the society in the 31st century. Any attempt to build a model of it is mostly based on jokes that are based loosely on tropes throughout all kinds of sci-fi. The movies and shows those tropes are from were littered with all kinds of dystopian and utopian concepts. This future society is an interesting thought, but it's hard to prove, especially since we have plenty of examples to the contrary, like the Wongs, or Fry's multi-billion-dollar savings account, and, well, of course, Mom. A ruthless interplanetary business mogul is a pretty glaring issue with this theory. But speaking of Mom, is Farnsworth bankrolling his whole busted operation off of some sort of settlement or royalties from Mom Corp? The professor's personal and working relationship with Mom is a bit hard to track. He claims in Bender's game that he was working for her for the third time after vowing twice never to work for her again. Presumably, he's referring to the episodes Crimes of the Hot and Mother's Day, where we learn of their previous working relationship. But here's where things get a bit messy. In Crimes of the Hot, the professor explains his role in creating sports utility robots 75 years ago as part of Mom's Friendly Robots. This would have been in 2927, based on the fact that it was 3002 at the time of his recounting. Look, he does not resign at the end of this clip. In fact, he ends the memory by telling an auditorium full of people that he and Mom did it right there on the table. In Mother's Day, on the other hand, we can assume when he yells, "We're finished!" and runs out of the room crying hysterically, his official resignation likely followed soon after. He tells us this is 70 years ago in the year 3000, placing the event and his resignation at 2930. However, we find out that the professor worked for Mom for at least 50 years during one of those intervals. We're told as much in the episode A Clone of My Own during a little film about Farnsworth's life. And finally, in the aforementioned Bender's game, the professor says that he's working for Mom again 30 some odd years ago. He says this in 3009, placing his employment with Mom somewhere in the 2970s. So if the professor worked for Mom for 50 years, he would have had to work for Mom since the 2870s and either have resigned in 2927 after the mission on Titan with Zoidberg, or resign in 2930. This would potentially make the timeline make sense, but Mom says she hasn't seen Farnsworth since that day in 2930, so maybe they're both just too senile to provide an accurate timeline. Regardless, those times we have seen shows that the professor is responsible for a lot of the profit that Mom Corp takes in. He's responsible for dark matter fuel, of which Mom Bile has a monopoly. He created the base model of robot that all modern Mom robot designs are based on. Who knows what else he's responsible over the 50 years he was employed? The things we see are just the specific innovations that caused tensions between Mom and Farnsworth. If the professor managed to maintain one patent over the years, or collect one similar form of royalty, he'd have plenty of capital to fund his money pit of a failed business. There's a chance he got severance packages of some sort at least one of the times he was fired, right? Mom wouldn't have crazy, ruthless lawyers, predatory contracts, and a devastating termination policy, would she? Alright, so maybe Planet Express isn't being circuitously funded by Mom Corp. But Planet Express has other business relationships. When Fishy Joe's started carrying poplars, they were selling them by the billions. This is significant because Joe Gilman was selling them at $2 a dozen. And he said he'd give Fry and Bender $1 a dozen. That should be a huge chunk of change. Planet Express was heavily involved in the supply chain, at least at first. But once they started protesting, possibly before, it's likely that Fishy Joe started handling the logistics themselves. It's also unclear if Farnsworth was ever directly involved. Lela seems to have been the ringleader, and Fry and Bender were the ones who made the agreement with Joe. And Fry certainly isn't a negotiator. Bender probably is, but do you think he's cutting Planet Express in on that deal? Besides, do you think business tycoon Joe Gilman is going to keep a verbal contract with a pair of street vendors? The most likely case here is Fishy Joe's took most, if not all, of the Poplar's money. Maybe that is the issue. Maybe they're not being funded at all, or at least not anymore. We know the company is in a financial crisis throughout the show, and we know that the current crew ranges from apathetic to inept, but what about in the past? In Mobius Dick, we find out that the professor's first delivery was 50 years prior to 3011. Now, if you're paying attention, you might notice that that doesn't line up cleanly with previously established timelines about Farnsworth's work history. Farnsworth was working for Mom in the 2970s. After his first delivery, look, Futurama's continuity is nowhere near as clean as we like to think it is because of that nibbler silhouette in the pilot. Let's just say for the sake of argument that the professor has been running a delivery operation for decades. But there's no indication that the service has been any better throughout those years. We hear about at least 3 previous crews that the company employed, and all 3 are either confirmed dead or missing. The first crew was almost entirely lost in the Bermuda Tetrahedron on their first delivery. Zoidberg survived in the escape pod. And technically the rest of the crew was rescued 50 years later, but I don't care because it's down there with Law and Oracle in terms of episode quality. The other 2 crews we hear about are wiped out by space bees, the very same space bees that nearly kill the current Planet Express crew. This wouldn't be that suspicious if it wasn't for the professor's track record. A hell of a lot of Professor Farnsworth's past statements and actions have shown a reckless disregard for the well-being of his crew to the point that one could argue it might benefit him for some of them to come in harm's way. I'm not saying the only reason that Professor keeps Hermes and Amy around is because they're compatible organ and blood donors.
Don't jump! Use another method that won't damage your liver. Other people need it, you know.
But it's definitely a reason. And Farnsworth is regularly sending his crew on incredibly dangerous, potentially deadly missions, usually instead of deliveries. These can't just be the most lucrative contracts. We've already established there's no money coming into this company. There has to be some reason the professor is always risking the life of his crew.
Oh God, you're alive! I mean, thank God you're alive!
Now granted, this scene does take place after the crew was drafted and involved in a military operation, but the issue here isn't the professor expecting the crew to be dead, it's that he seems to have preferred it that way. Which makes the second half of this exchange downright alarming.
Sorry, check back in 3 days, a week at the most.
Is this just because the professor has a reckless disregard for human life, or is he actively trying to kill his crew?
But you'll never find a crew willing to take on a mission so suicidally dangerous.
Because it really feels like he's doing this on purpose, especially considering Lela is forced to sign a pretty comprehensive waiver for the whole crew before joining the company proper.
Death by airlock failure. Death by brain parasite. Death by sonic diarrhea.
Oh, you don't want that.
Yeah, maybe the company is just protecting itself because it goes through crews like Fry goes through Slurm. If you had a history of losing crews on dangerous missions, you'd want to make sure you were covered if the worst should happen. Though, you'd also benefit greatly from a zero liability waiver if you were deliberately sending employees to their deaths.
I intend to do as little dying as possible.
Sign the paper.
Look, Planet Express has been around for decades, so at some point, they must have been at least breaking even if not profitable. But it doesn't look like they were ever any good at delivering packages. All the old crews we know about are dead on failed deliveries. So, in the past, packages weren't getting delivered because the crews were dying, but money was coming in. In the present, future, technically, packages are still not being delivered, but now the crew isn't dying and money isn't coming in. The only variables here are whether or not the crew is alive and whether or not the company makes money. I'm not saying this proves anything. I'm just saying it's an incredibly concerning dichotomy, especially when considering the Space Bees and their apparent role in Professor Farnsworth's sick scheme. I mentioned earlier that Farnsworth holds on to career chips he needs to staff his company, but it's hard to tell why. This isn't a one-off. We see him collect a career chip from Hermes in one episode, and then of course, there's this incredibly suspicious envelope labeled contents of a space wasp's stomach, ignoring another instance of Futurama's not so perfect continuity. How in the name of the all-powerful atheismo did Farnsworth get his hands on those when a space beehive is so dangerous? While the professor sends crews on all kinds of dangerous and deadly missions, none are as deadly as collecting space honey. At least 2 Planet Express crews have met their end there, and when the current crew took it on, Bender was almost left behind, Fry got impaled, but survived, and Lela fell into a coma and nearly died. It's the biggest beating we've ever seen the crew take, and possibly by design. Look, I'll admit, I can't prove anything. The professor is such a crafty bastard that he's even baked in some plausible deniability into the Space Honey mission itself. He didn't even send Lela and Co to the Space Beehive at all. In fact, he explicitly warned them.
You're not good enough to go on your next mission.
Ultimately, it was Lela and those former captains who decided to go on this dangerous mission. But if the professor really didn't want Lela to take on this mission, couldn't he have just, I don't know, not told her? Are you going to try to tell me that Professor Farnsworth didn't know the best way to get Lela to do something is to tell her she's not good enough to do it? That's probably the case for a lot of the more resilient captains whose skills start to keep them and their crews alive longer than is economically viable for Planet Express. So then the professor just negs them into a suicide mission in a space beehive where he apparently has a convenient way of recovering career chips. Inconveniently though, it looks like Lela has blown up his whole business model because...
Burn on that old crew. The only things they did better than us were suck and die.
Anyway, there you go. Planet Express might not be an organ harvesting insurance scam, but it certainly isn't a delivery company. So next time you have to send a package somewhere off planet, I'd probably just go with Mom's Friendly Delivery Company. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.